Welcome to GameFights, the show on the internet where two gamers argue over their favorite games, and you get to decide who wins by voting in the comments. I'm your host, JoePro, and this is GameFights. In episode 3, it's showdown of some of the greatest platforming games in history. Introducing this week's special guest, DynamitePenguins, fighting for the Rayman series, versus your host, JoePro, fighting on behalf of the Donkey Kong Country franchise. Ready or not, it's time to fight. Hey everybody, I'm JoePro, and I'm joined today by Mr. DynamitePenguins himself. Say hey.
Hey, what's up?
And today we're doing our third episode of GameFights. We are talking the Rayman franchise versus the Donkey Kong Country franchise, and specifically zeroing in on Rayman Legends versus Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. So as you guys saw in the intro, I am rooting today for Donkey Kong fighting on Donkey Kong's behalf, and DynamitePenguins is going to be going for Rayman and Rayman Legends. You want to get started? Tell us a bit about yourself, your channel, and then let us know why you like Rayman so much.
Hey, I'm DynamitePenguins. You may know me. I do some animations occasionally, although I sometimes take breaks between uploads.
Like once a year, about once a year.
Yeah, maybe. 2 if I'm lucky. Yeah, that's basically what I do. Yeah, and I'll be rooting for Rayman. I think it's a good platforming series. It always brings a lot of unique mechanics and kind of does the best of what Mario and Sonic do, in my opinion. It's a lot about fast-paced platforming compared to like Mario.
Yeah, you're right. It does kind of feel more on rails. Like you do have control of where you're moving, but especially in the music-based levels, it's forcing you to go at full speed, and you are kind of moving more with the rhythm and that sort of thing. But even some of the regular levels, like when I was replaying it this week, some of the regular ones you're kind of forced to move through pretty quickly while something's chasing you, and you're just trying to survive the encounter.
Yeah, it definitely wants you to keep moving throughout the level.
Yeah, it's super unique, Rayman is. So getting started, I'm just going to summarize what I love about Donkey Kong Country, and then we'll jump more into it category by category. So getting started with Donkey Kong Country, it's been around for quite a while, since the Super Nintendo, and the original trilogy is super great. It looks beautiful. It has a very unique art style that was extremely ahead of its time for its release date, and it's very renowned, very successful, and a lot of people, call back to it even these days. Then it came back on the Wii with Donkey Kong Country Returns, which is another great game, and then Tropical Freeze for the Wii U and the Switch came out originally about 6 years ago or 5 years ago now, and it's a super awesome, phenomenal game. Beautiful graphics, extremely detailed. The soundtrack is probably one of my favorite soundtracks in gaming, and tight controls, lots of variety, and the gameplay. And I love it. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and I definitely feel like, even though I love Rayman, and I'm gonna put that out there, I love Rayman, and I believe you like Donkey Kong Country.
Oh yeah, they're good.
Yeah, they're both great franchises, but I have to pick a side here, and it's got to be Donkey Kong. I do like it considerably more than Rayman, as much as I do love Rayman. So again, do you want to just kind of rush through everything that you like about the series and the original trilogy as well?
Yeah, I just like it's like a really creative and colorful like aesthetic. It's always like very artistic. It's always been known for having really good visuals and music, and it's just all about being creative, and like I said, it's a very fast-paced game. It really changes a lot throughout the games. The first one's is known for being really challenging. The second one and third one aren't so much. And Origins and Legends, I'd say, are in the middle of that. But they all kind of keep the same flow of gameplay.
Gotcha. Yeah, it seems like it speeds up even more towards the later games, towards Origins and Legends, than it was in the original. So I will say one thing is I have not really played the first 3. I've played bits and pieces and kind of tried them out, but I don't have much experience with them. So I was kind of watching some gameplay on YouTube earlier, trying to prepare for this. And so I would say that yeah, overall, Rayman seems a bit more colorful than Donkey Kong Country. And so if we're going to get started talking about visuals and graphics as our first main category, Donkey Kong Country has more subdued colors, and especially the original game, it's very dark and atmospheric, and the jungle is very filled with dark greens and dark blues. And Rayman does have some darker areas, but it seems like overall throughout the entire series, including Legends and Origins, it's a little bit more bright and cheery and cartoony. With that said, though, Tropical Freeze is a lot brighter than the original Donkey Kong Country games, so it seems like both franchises have trended a little bit brighter and more cheery, whereas they started out a little bit darker. But I do think that, especially since the original Kong Country trilogy was on the Super Nintendo, that it is visually more impressive than the original Rayman games on the PS1, because pretty sure Donkey Kong Country came out earlier than Rayman, which, yeah, since it was on the Super Nintendo at least a few years earlier, and I feel like it honestly...
Yeah, Rayman was, just for reference, the first Rayman was 1995.
Okay, right. So yeah, a few years earlier, and I feel like Donkey Kong actually looked better and more detailed with its advanced graphics. And then if you come up to the current day, Legends looks, oh my gosh, so amazing. It looks so beautiful. The aesthetic is amazing, and I love the colors and the detail, but I would still say that Tropical Freeze is even at a higher level with its overall just crisp imagery. So how do you feel about visuals?
The Rayman series has always tried to do something stylistic. The first one, it was very colorful, and it just had its environments were really what stood out among a lot of other PlayStation games at the time. Rayman 2 actually did go for a lot of darker aesthetics outside of levels. Like, the game opens with everyone being enslaved, and it's pretty dark at the beginning, so it definitely can get dark when it wants to, and it's always had a lot of good style. Rayman 3, kind of the same thing as 2. I'd say Rayman 3 has the least, probably it doesn't have a style that stands out as much as the other games. But I will say, one level in particular, the funky board sections are very interesting and very stylized.
Definitely.
Origins and Legends, I'd say, are where the game's kind of peaked in visuals and style. They kind of went back to that with new hardware, because last time they really tried to go for a really full-blown stylization was probably the first game back in 1995. Basically, the style it has kind of hits me a lot more than with Donkey Kong. It feels like Tropical Freeze, it's kind of like a mixture. It's more realistic than, I'd say, Mario. It doesn't go for that rubber look that Mario always has, but it doesn't hit me with anything too distinct.
Yeah, I will give you that Rayman Legends, specifically compared to Tropical Freeze, Rayman Legends has a more unique art style. I like that it's a little bit more original and fresh than Donkey Kong is, but Donkey Kong does have the silhouette levels, which are absolutely beautiful, and also a lot of the levels in the savannah area, the backgrounds kind of extend so far, and there's so much detail, and you can even see little animals hopping around back there. So those are things that Rayman doesn't have, because its background is more a background. It's more stagnant, and it's just drawn to be what it is, whereas Donkey Kong's is has a little bit more movement and stuff going on, and animations in the background, including some levels even have little creatures hopping around that jump on little buttons, which then have spikes fall on you and stuff. So the background kind of plays into, and the environment plays into the gameplay a little bit more. But with that said, Rayman does have levels I believe in Legends, there's one called There's Always a Bigger Fish, where there's a fish monster chasing you, and some of the background elements are falling on you and stuff like that. So it does have that as well as Donkey Kong does, on the minecart levels where spikes and just rotating objects are falling and collapsing everywhere, and you have to try to avoid them. So they both do have that, but I think Donkey Kong's backgrounds are even more detailed and expressive, but Rayman's more unique. So kind of comes down to, do you like the unique one more, or the just super detailed and colorful one? I guess I don't know. They're both so great, so it's really hard to choose a favorite.
I will say there are background elements that usually move, and you can get lums from tapping insects and skeletons and stuff in the background, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So there is stuff moving there. But yeah, it does definitely go for, it's supposed to be almost like a canvas in back of you. It's not supposed to be super deep.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just there, and there's not a whole lot of depth to it. So, but yeah, definitely both games really unique and great visuals. Moving on to the music and the sounds, just the overall sounds of the games. Both are oh my gosh. I mean, like, I can't even express how great the soundtracks of Rayman Legends and Tropical Freeze are, and then all of the older games in their respective franchises have really great soundtracks as well. So if you want to get started and talk about what you like about the Rayman soundtracks, and if you think they're better than Donkey Kong, and why you think they're better.
Ooh, I don't know. Trying to say one's better is kind of tough. They're both really good. I don't want to.
You got to fight for your game, man.
I'm not the best person with music. I don't feel qualified to talk on this matter, but I will say they both have great orchestration, but I think Rayman, what it does better is it's a lot more whimsical, and it often does a better job of capturing the scene that you're in. It has often you'll like hear in the songs inspiration from movies, like in the underwater levels you'll hear a lot of James Bond,
a lot of Mission Impossible
music. Yeah, and all that. You'll see a lot of references to that. So it really likes the capture style in it, and that's like what I said back in Rayman 2. There's a lot of distinct styles between just the whimsical worlds versus like the serious like side of everything.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say overall, like the Rayman Legends soundtrack, and I believe the Origins as well, has a lot of really basic pieces where it's just kind of whistling, or you hear a little bit of musical notes here and there combined with whistling, which turns out, I believe the guy whistling is the gentleman that also wrote the music as well. And there's so much live music in the Rayman Legends and Origins soundtracks, and for Donkey Kong, it's the same way. Tropical Freeze is almost 100% orchestrated, and it's absolutely beautiful. David Wise comes in and does the music in Tropical Freeze like he did with the original trilogy, and his melodies, his atmospheric music, and his arrangements are so original and engrossing. There's some levels in the savannah, the one where everything's kind of burning, fiery fields, and the music in that one is absolutely epic, and there's a kind of a great drum beat going on in the background. Then there's music on the Homecoming Hijinks level where you go back to the area from Donkey Kong Country Returns, and you kind of seeing all the old locations from that game, and it's just playing an absolute triumphant return that is just beautiful and so well written. So both games really do have a great soundtrack. Tropical Freeze, I would definitely say is wouldn't definitely say it, but I would say it's one of my favorite gaming soundtracks, and probably my favorite gaming soundtrack, but it's hard to say up against games like Mario Galaxy and a few of the Zelda games, but it's very, very close for me, and I do think it's better than the Rayman Legends soundtrack, and I think overall the Donkey Kong Country games have better soundtracks than Rayman, although both are really, really good. Tropical Freeze and the other games just have more variety in their music, and a lot of the Rayman music kind of sounds stylistically the same. There's the Rayman sound, and then there's the kind of Mission Impossible water sound that's a little bit more sneaky, and but besides that, there's not a whole lot of other type of variety, whereas Tropical Freeze goes into every genre pretty much, including like a rock music for the bosses.
I would have to disagree with some of what you said there, because it does have a lot of variety. I feel like what Donkey Kong does is a lot of very environmental pieces, whereas what Rayman does in each world, like you got the mariachi world where you have a lot of that, you have the medieval world with a lot of medieval sounds, then you have the underwater world where it's like Mission Impossible. Every world it does something different, and then on top of all that you have the music levels, which are literally music.
Yeah, that's true.
You literally platform to the music, which is a really, really brilliant idea, and it really brings you into the music.
Really well done. Sometimes they get a little off sync, but for the most part they stay right where they need to be, and they're really original. And that's a good point. Yeah, the medieval world and the mariachi still uses a lot of the same kind of melodies from the other worlds. They all kind of share some of the same melodies, but then they dress it up in a different genre, different style, with the different theming and era that they're kind of based on. So all good points there. So let's move on from music and visuals because, again, both games and both game franchises excel really well in those categories. And let's go into gameplay itself. So we'll talk about like how much content both games have, how good the controls are, and the gameplay just itself, like which ones we like more and why. So getting started, I'll say just a quick few things about Rayman. Things I like and don't like, and then we'll talk about Donkey Kong a little later. So I do like that in Rayman Legends and Origins, there's like stretch goals for the lums. So, you know, like you can get the gold trophy or the bronze or the silver, depending on how many you can collect. And so that's really cool. And trying to get those, whereas in Donkey Kong, like the bananas don't do as much for you. And then you get like the 10. You have to remind me of the names, but of the
Teensies?
Yes, the teensies, right. Teensies in trouble. There we go. 10 teensies per stage, and collecting them is always so much fun, and it's so cute when they're getting beat up by different enemies, and you gotta kind of go through and save them. So again, that's something that in some ways it does better than Donkey Kong, where you're just collecting the Kong letters and the puzzle pieces. But in the Wii U version of Legends, which was the original version and the main version that's out there, the almost half the levels in the main area of the game are Murphy levels, and so you have to use the Wii U gamepad to control Murphy, and the computer, if you're not playing with a friend, will control your playable character. And so I feel like even in the other versions, like I've been playing the PS4 version lately, it's just a little bit too many levels using Murphy, and I don't know, I kind of prefer the regular levels. So how do you feel about the Murphy levels?
I don't believe it's half. I believe it's more around a third or fourth. Or there are some levels that use Murphy, but they're really short. I'll say they definitely slow down the pace of the game, which isn't the best part of the game. So it kind of hurts when you have to, especially because sometimes they block the progression to the next level, so you can't go around them. I'd say if you have multiple players, it's a little more bearable, but sometimes just having to work with a CPU kind of really bogs down the experience, honestly. But there's still really like creative levels and use of the gamepad, which is something Donkey Kong doesn't know much about because it turns off the gamepad.
Maybe for the best though, because then it's not distracting from the gameplay like it does in Paper Mario Color Splash and in Rayman Legends and a lot of other games.
Yeah, well, if it's done well. Maybe they didn't have enough ideas down there at Retro.
No!
Retro lacking in ideas. That's the first I've ever heard that. So I also give Rayman kudos, Legends, for having lots of playable characters that can be unlocked, and again, the music stages. Now, with the boss fights, though, this is another area. Gotta give it the Tropical Freeze for sure, and it's a big part of both games, as it is with any 2D platformer. So Legends has some good bosses. The dragon fight in the first world is really good, but then there's some bosses that aren't good, like in the water-themed world at the end, you fight like some type of another kind of weird dragon thing, and he's super easy to beat, and it's very slow pacing and kind of clunky. But then in Tropical Freeze, yeah, it's really difficult bosses, and I get that that can be a bit annoying for some people, but the rock music that's playing during them and just the different phases and stuff you got to do, like with the polar bear and some of the other bosses, I really enjoy, and I think they're a lot more ambitious and exciting.
Oh boy. I'll actually say that the boss fights in Tropical Freeze were probably the low point for me, honestly. And I think it comes down to Donkey Kong doesn't feel like he's capable of fighting as much as, say, Rayman. Because Rayman's always punching and fighting through the levels, I feel like it's kind of just an extension of the normal gameplay that he's jumping around and fighting. And whereas Donkey Kong just feels weird trying to all of a sudden stay in the same spot and fight. And I feel like most of the boss fights feel like you're standing still just waiting for the enemies to attack.
That's how I feel about the Rayman ones, though. And a lot of them, you're just kind of hanging there waiting, and you can't even really move anywhere. You're like hanging, and you're able to shoot, so you just kind of stay at your one spot, and you try to shoot once the boss's vulnerable spot becomes available. You can kind of jump between like two floating things to hang on, but there's a few bosses where you don't have a whole lot of mobility options, and it keeps you in that tiny area, and then once you hit them, you can move on to the next tiny area.
I feel like that's true, but what I say Rayman would probably do differently is that there are platforms, and a lot of the attacks involve you moving platforms, where Donkey Kong, there's usually just a flat surface where you fight, and you usually wait for the enemy to attack and give you your opening, which I felt was really ruined the pace of the boss fights. They were really slow, and the problem was, because there's no checkpoint between like the 3 phases the boss would usually have, if you played a few times, you'd end up waiting till you could get to the next part of the fight, and it just felt like the more I lost, the more I was waiting for everything to just get over with.
Yeah, that's true. I can definitely understand the whole checkpoint issue, because they are pretty long fights, and then if you have to restart them from the beginning a whole bunch of times, it gets kind of tedious. And I would agree, they are the low point of the game for me. In general, I just don't really like boss fights in games compared to the platforming sections, but I still feel like they're good. They're just not as good as the levels themselves, and I still feel like they're better than the bosses in Rayman Legends.
I'd say for Rayman Legends, they're kind of hit and miss. They have some of the same problems as I have with Tropical Freeze. What I like is, as I said, it feels like a natural extension, because the boss fights still include a lot of platforming sections. Usually in between like phases of the fight, you'll actually have to like platform up to the next part. So there still includes platforming and combat, which are already included in most of the main levels. They also have checkpoints in between, so if you like die at one point, you get right back up and keep going. And yeah, I actually really like the robot fight against the robot dragon in the third world. I know some of them are particularly easy like that one, but I think just visually and in the music and everything, it's just a really fun boss fight.
Yeah, I think the first fight with the first like kind of creature, like dragon type creature in the medieval world, is probably my favorite of them all. But yeah, overall they're not bad. They're just not my favorite thing in the world. So I definitely argue that Tropical Freezes are better. They're still not perfect either, but they're better. And they have like really cute cutscenes that introduce them too, whereas the ones in Rayman don't usually. Sometimes when you beat them, they have some type of thing that happens, but usually before you play them and while you're playing them, it doesn't have much extra detail. And so speaking of detail, let's move into that and the level designs themselves. Something I really like about Tropical Freeze and some of the other Kong Country games too, but specifically in Tropical Freeze is, for example, in the jungle world, it's like kind of juice jungle factory type setting, and as you're progressing through the world, you realize that these bad guys, these enemies, are actually like squeezing fruit, harvesting the juice, cutting it all up and stuff, and then collecting it, and then they're actually freezing it, you find out in one of the last levels, and then turning it into popsicles, which are given to their polar bear master, who's the boss. So when you're going through the world, it feels like cohesive level design that's kind of telling a background narrative and of this fruit factory, and then at the end you get the payoff and realize that they're all serving their polar bear overlord. So that's something, again, in Rayman, the only like really background narrative that's going through is that you're kind of running through these worlds, unlocking new paintings, and then you have these people that kidnap the princesses, and you keep seeing the same cutscene again of her squeezing their noses. She escapes, and then you end up punching them later, and they crash land into the asteroid, and it plays a really nice kind of great beat. I will give it that. I love that kind of rhythmic beat that it plays when the little devil characters are stabbing them on the asteroid. And I'm probably like stomping on all the lore of Rayman. I'm not using correct terminology here, but I do like some of that. But overall, I feel like it's a bit repetitive. Each world kind of ends the same way, whereas with Kong Country, each world is super unique and kind of tells a background story.
Well, yeah, it's definitely not a game with much story. It's basically Polycus or the Bubble Dreamer in these games. It kind of changes. Basically dreams up 5 nightmares, and it's kind of 5 separate stories of 5 different, like, the evil Mr. Dark Teensy guy. And you basically just need to stop him in each story, so it's all different. And none of them are super progressive. They kind of just keep going until you find the boss, fight the nightmare. So yeah, it's very simple. In terms of that, I would say DK does it in a similar way. It maybe has some more background elements about what's going on, like you said with the popsicle, but it's still is very simple in terms of get to the boss, fight, and especially at the very end of the game, I won't spoil it, it was just very anticlimactic to me.
Yeah, I could agree with that. And I don't know, it's just, I think that the country games just have a little bit more going on in terms of detail and in the level design. Rayman's level design's a bit more repetitive to me. It's just kind of, you're jumping around. There's a lot of sections where you're kind of floating in the air and then the wind, and then you're just punching bad guys, wall jumping, trying to get the lums, trying to get the teensies. A lot of similar obstacles. And Donkey Kong, each level I can pretty much recognize. Like if I see a video of it, like I know exactly what level that is. Like there's some with windmills as the main theme. There's some with a tornado as the main theme. Some with a burning jungle, or one with like giant ships crashing into the seashore. So there's a bit more elements there, and then you have like the minecart ones and the ones on the rocket, which I really enjoy. And for Rayman, it's basically you got the regular levels, you got the music levels, and you got the boss levels, and you do have those cool time modes too, which are really fun. But I think there's a bit more gameplay variety from my point of view in Tropical Freeze.
Yeah, I can see how you can introduce a lot of different mechanics and gimmicks with Donkey Kong. But that's what I think they mainly are, is they're often gimmicks to the level, and that although Rayman often some of the levels can blend together, they all have their own distinct just personality throughout the level, even if it doesn't have any one mechanic that stands out as much to it.
Yeah, there's some that are really good, like that Mission Impossible type level where you go down into the place, and there's like the pool table, and you're kind of sneaking around, and then you get to the end of each of the two portions, and then you have to work your way back in the dark without getting caught. I really like that one. Donkey Kong Country also has, in the case of the recent games, multiple playable characters that you can team up with, like Dixie Kong, Cranky, and Diddy, and Rayman doesn't have that. It does have tons and dozens of playable characters, but they all pretty much control and feel the same, so that's also another way that Tropical Freeze adds versatility and variety that Rayman doesn't really have, right?
Interesting you say versatility, because that was a big point I had with the game. So for Tropical Freeze, that's actually a problem I have, is that mechanics such as hovers and extra jumps are locked behind these power-ups, which you can then lose. And it feels like Donkey Kong isn't very versatile, and this kind of goes for the whole DKC series, honestly. Whereas Rayman has jumps, glides, punches, wall jumps, he can grab the ledge, he has a wind-up punch, he can spin, he has a ground pound, he can run on walls. Comparatively, DK just feels very limited in he has a jump, a roll, and a slam, and it just makes him not feel very versatile.
Well, technically in the Wii one, he can blow on dandelions and stuff.
Oh,
so
I forgot.
Awesome gameplay there.
But yeah, my main problem is it feels very limited, and a lot of his basic abilities that Rayman has are just locked behind power-ups, which he can then lose. So it feels like he has less options, and I feel like the levels have to be designed around that. So whenever Donkey Kong faces an obstacle, his options are wait for the obstacle to move out of the way, and then he can jump, because he can't jump on it if it has like a spike on its head, or if it's on
roll
fire.
Into it.
Well, not if it's above ground though.
Yeah.
It has to be on the ground if it's in the air. And that's why I feel like the pacing of the gameplay gets kind of ruined by his lack of moves. Because
but then I can also circle back to the Murphy levels, where you have to kind of like wait for whoever you're playing with, or for the computer, or for you to push the button for Murphy to be able to like smack someone in the eyeball so they can't hurt you, and sometimes you have to wait and stop for that. So I mean, that Rayman does have some of those kind of slow
pacing. You usually
pacing.
don't have to stop though, because the pacing of the levels is usually the one character can run while the other is moving obstacles out of the way while it happens. The problem I have with Donkey Kong's main gameplay is that most obstacles, the solution is wait. You wait for an enemy to move out of the way. If there's not a platform there, you wait for the platform to move to you. If the barrel's not facing the right way, you wait till it moves and then you shoot. It feels like it's a lot of stop and go, because he doesn't have the resources like Rayman, where he can just run up and punch an enemy that's in his way.
Yeah, I can agree with that. It's not as fast-paced of a game. It's not meant to be. You're meant to be paying more attention to the background and just the overall atmosphere of it. And you know, it's more of a tight platformer, and Rayman's more loose. It's more fast. It's more speed focused. So it's definitely a good point that separates the two. And I guess it just kind of comes down to what you like more. And that's a good segue into my final big point. So overall, everything we've talked about so far, I like Donkey Kong a little bit more, but the thing that separates it completely for me and makes me like Tropical Freeze a lot more than Rayman Legends is something you're probably going to disagree with, but it is the controls. I don't really like the controls in Rayman. I feel like they're a bit too loose, and I often have kind of trouble having it do what I want it to do, and I never have that kind of trouble. And Donkey Kong feels a lot more precise, but in Rayman, certain things, just, I don't know, I can't get used to them. They're so like floaty, especially when the wind is like going on, and then just some of the different punching mechanics and, you know, jumping up and ground pounding down and stuff. It just doesn't, it's not as precise as I would like, and I think Donkey Kong controls better personally.
For me, it's more, I actually think the opposite. I'm more about having that loose control. So I really like that Rayman feels like you have full control over him at all times. He can, because like his different moves like gliding, you feel like you can always like maneuver away. With Donkey Kong, it always feels very heavy, and I feel like I can't control his momentum. Because whenever I feel like I roll, I feel like I just sent myself flying, and Donkey Kong doesn't have like, because he's so heavy, it's hard to maneuver him back compared to Rayman, where I feel like I can instantly do whatever to change his momentum. You can even like punch and kick often to change the momentum of your character.
Yeah, definitely. Donkey Kong's more clunky, but by design. I mean, it's no fault of the game development. It's just the character itself is a giant gorilla, so I guess that's kind of what it stems down to. And then all of the characters in Rayman control, like, they are the same physics, right? Like, even the larger ones?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're all just, it's just different skins, which, you know, that is what it is. Very cool addition, especially with the Mario and Luigi costumes on the Wii U version and everything. So, any final points you want to get to before we wrap this up?
Just going back to pacing, there's no game overs in Rayman, and the respawn time is about a split second until you're back in the game. So that's another thing with pacing.
Yeah, I was scared you were going to bring that up because that's one of the things I definitely got to give to your game. Like, when you die, you kind of blow up and expand, and then all of a sudden you're just back. You're there, and there's no lives or anything. And really, lives aren't much of an issue in Tropical Freeze for me. Like, for me personally, I'm sure it is for somebody, but for me, I don't really game over. But still, when you die, you gotta wait for your balloon to come down and pop back down.
Yeah, I didn't have a single game over, although I did use some banana coins to make sure I had lives on me.
But you do have...
The game gives you plenty of those.
Yeah, but to be fair, you didn't 100% it. And also, I do like in Tropical Freeze, to your point, is you can see where the checkpoints are. You know once you've hit one, and you feel a sense of accomplishment. But in Rayman, you don't know when you hit one. It's just you die, and you just restart at some arbitrary location. But overall, yeah, that's a good point that you made, and I give Rayman kudos for that.
Just some more bonus feature I'd like to throw in about the game. It's got Kung Foot, which is a really fun multiplayer minigame. It's like soccer.
I know, it's so good.
It's really fun to play. It's also got a challenge mode where they have challenges going on. They change daily and weekly, and they're still going on with different challenges you can do. And you can get more lums with those, and you can unlock some more costumes. Also, Legends includes most of the levels from Rayman Origins as well. So it has an additional like 40 levels added onto the package, which is always great.
I want to say, though, that Tropical Freeze, I'm pretty sure, has more original levels than Legends does. Legends is kind of short. There's only a few worlds with only like 10 levels each or so. And then there's a lot of levels from Origins. But if you don't include those, I feel like Donkey Kong has more courses.
Yeah, it probably has more courses if you're just talking fully original ones. Yeah, Donkey Kong probably would have more. But overall, it's the package. It has more. And they're even... And it's not just like they just ported the levels either. They are in like the like enhanced UbiArt engine now.
Yeah, I gotcha. I don't really have any final points. I think I've gone through everything I was thinking. This has been really tough for me because I really love Rayman Legends. Again, I will say I think the original Rayman trilogy doesn't look as good, and from what I can tell, doesn't play as good and sound as good as the original Kong Country trilogy, even though the Donkey Kong trilogy was on older hardware on the Super Nintendo. So I feel like it should not look as good as it does, but I feel like it's better. As far as the recent games, I love all of them. I love Tropical Freeze, I love Legends and Origins, so it's really tough. This has been tough for me to say that to put Rayman down, but I do think overall, because of the controls, the better soundtrack, and Donkey Kong, and some of the more gameplay variety, I definitely think Donkey Kong as a series and as a game is better than the Rayman series and games. So that's it from me. And what's your last closing arguments before we get out of here?
Yeah, I'd say overall Rayman always has more abilities, and that makes the level designs a lot more dynamic and than what Donkey Kong is able to pull off. And yeah, I think that's all we got. Boss fights are also, I'd say, better.
No.
And less repetitive.
You'd be wrong.
Yeah. The boss fights in Donkey Kong go on for like an hour. The fish one, it was like 8 hits.
The Rayman ones are too easy. They last like a minute or two sometimes.
Well, they are. Well, they are in the. That's just Legends mainly. Origins is more difficult, although the bosses are slower paced there. In the original trilogy, they're all much more difficult. Rayman 1 in particular is very difficult, and it's a lot slower, and I'd say that would be the closest. If you're looking for a Rayman game that feels like DKC, that would be the closest one to Donkey Kong.
Okay. Well, I gotta check out that original trilogy and play them, because they do sound pretty fun. They look pretty fun, so I'll definitely be on doing that as well. But like I said, guys, this was for both franchises compared, but specifically the last 2 games. So let us know in the comments which franchise, which games you like more, and who you think won this 3rd episode of GameFight. So I want to thank my guest. Sorry we ran a little bit short on time. You probably maybe had a few last points you wanted to say and we didn't get to, but we can talk about those more another time. I'm sure I'll have you back on another GameFight at some point in the future and some more videos on my channel. So thank you so much for joining me today. And guys, please check out his channel as well. Super talented with his stop motion animation videos. And Dynamite Penguins, any final words for everybody?
Rayman is great. Rayman for Smash.
Rayman, oh yes, this is something we can agree on. Let's do it. Let's put Rayman in Smash. Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong are already there. Dixie Kong should be in there, but she's not for some reason. But please, let's put Rayman in Smash. It needs to happen.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right. Sounds good. No problem, man. Thank you. And guys, we'll talk to you later.